Alright, this is just a response to Leuey, L-E-U-E-Y, who left some comments on my Is the Bible Full of Contradictions video. Thanks for those comments, Leuey. I hope I'm pronouncing your username correctly. You said that firstly that my arguments tended to hinge on, with regard to the first contradiction, myself knowing what's going on inside Matthew's head and his intentions. Now, I don't know if you're aware of the study of hermeneutics, or the principles of interpretation, and within the study of the academic study of theology, hermeneutics is an accepted and credible method of study, and it can be applied to any book of the Bible. Certainly can be applied to the Gospel of Matthew, and one part of the whole process of hermeneutics is seeking to understand what an author is trying to say, what they call authorial intent. And we do this through an observation of and careful reading of the text. Now, the whole field of study of hermeneutics is based on the assumption that whenever one writes or even speaks, someone is trying to communicate something from their mind to the mind of other people. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable assumption to make. Otherwise, the basis of language and communication completely disappears. And so, with reference to Matthew, and in terms of messianic expectation, prophecy in the Old Testament stated specific things regarding the coming Messiah, and one of the key things it related was that the Messiah would be a king in the Davidic line. He would be a descendant of King David. Now, we can deduce, it's not an assumption, it's a deduction, we can deduce that Matthew is keen at the start of his gospel to show that Jesus is a descendant of David, because he specifically says so in the very first sentence, first verse, Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. Now, incidentally, this verse, if you look at it, demonstrates one of my key arguments, that to say that someone was the son of someone else within the historical and cultural context of Matthew did not necessarily indicate literal and direct paternity. Matthew says there, I'll read it to you, Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David. He's keen to get David across there, the son of Abraham. Now, there we have three specific generations, Jesus, David and Abraham, that cover a period of thousands of years. Throw into this Matthew's numerical obsession with the number 14, which I talked about, the numerical value in Hebrew for the name David. And this also underlines the deduction that Matthew is keen to show that Jesus is a descendant of David. That's what he's trying to do here. He's underlining the fact that Jesus Christ is a descendant, a genealogical descendant of David. Look at the portrayal of Jesus also in Matthew. Matthew, one of the themes that runs through the Gospel of Matthew is the kingship of Jesus. And Matthew portrays him as a king in fulfillment, obviously, of the Old Testament prophecy. This is a theme that theologians of all different strands commonly accept. Now, in light of all this and other examples in Matthew, if you want, you can also read the Gospel. It's not ridiculous to deduce that one of Matthew's intentions is to demonstrate that Jesus is a king of the Davidic line in fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. It's not an assumption, it's a deduction. Your second point was that that my second argument about the second contradiction depended on me knowing what's going on inside the head of the crowd of people. And again, you say that's a bit of an assumption to make. Well, again, I would say it's not an assumption, it's a perfectly valid deduction. I would be highly surprised, because of the late date for the composition of the Gospel of John, that he sets out to contradict earlier established Gospel accounts with regard to the birthplace of Jesus. You see, one of John's purposes in writing his Gospel, and he states it in his Gospel, is to write these things so that you might believe. If he wanted you to believe, don't you think he would admit that he'd leave out details that might cast doubt on Jesus' claims to be the Messiah? It's highly unlikely, therefore, that John intends you to understand from the crowd statement that Jesus was actually born in Galilee, as opposed to Bethlehem, where it was foretold he would be born. If John wants to persuade me that Jesus is the promised Messiah, he shouldn't tell me that he fails to fulfill Old Testament prophecy on such a basic level. So again, I reiterate, John is simply recording the speculation of the crowd regarding Jesus. Now your third point was about the translatory error, and you said this can go either way. It's a kind of silly contradiction in the first place, but you would think that if God were proofreading the Bible, he would make sure that the translation were accurate. Well, as I understand it, the Christian doctrine of the inerrancy of Scripture, and other people can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Christian doctrine of the inerrancy of Scripture has to do with Scripture as it was originally given or originally written. In the English language, as you know, there are a plethora of translations as well as paraphrase versions of the Bible. In fact, the Bible, as you know, is probably the most translated book in all of history. We accept as Christians that errors do occur in translation, but to my knowledge there are no errors that significantly alter the meaning or the teaching of a particular book, a particular author, or the Bible as a whole. The greatest possible care is taken in translation. So yeah, that's just my answer to that one. Well, I hope that answers some of your objections there, your comments, your observations, questions, whatever. Yeah, thanks for leaving them. Cheers. Bye.